My name is Marguerite Herman, and welcoming everyone who is streaming online, who is here at the courthouse watching in person, and who will be watching this video as it's archived on the League of Women Voters of Wyoming website, which is, as the banner up there says, www.wyominglwv.org. So the videos from the Superintendent of Public Instruction Forum, which is first, and the gubernatorial, which is second, will be archived there starting probably the day after tomorrow. We'll have that up. We'll get it up as soon as we can. And again, it is being streamed live from the homepage of the Laramie County government. And as I welcome everyone here, I also want to thank the Laramie County Commissioners, Laramie County government, for making this facility available to us free. It's wonderful, and their staff to record the event. And before we get into the forum itself, I have just a little bit of introductions to make. First of all, this is the League of Women Voters of Wyoming, and we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit, non-sectarian group whose mission really is simply to get voters engaged with their government. And to do that, we conduct forums like this, a lot of voter service campaigns, and then we just making things available to them. And in service of that end, just want to point out two new additions to our website. One is about our judicial retention. Every 2 years on the general election ballot, you will find judges on there. And judges every so often will have to stand for retention. In Wyoming, we have a merit selection form of choosing judges, but then after a while, they are up to the voters to keep them on the bench. So I urge you to go to the website, and I also have some handouts on the table out there, which gives a backgrounder on the judicial selection system. You can find out from the map what judicial district you live in, and then you can find out which judges are on your ballot. If you go online, it's a direct link to a source of information which could be very helpful, we hope will be, and that is the Wyoming State Bar. Every 2 years they ask their attorneys to rate judges on such things as knowledge of the law, being prepared in court, courtesy, what we think are really legitimate things on which to rate a judge. So you can make the connection yourself. And we have some printouts of the judges who are up on your ballot this year, or you go online and you got to get a direct link. And for your information, you're having 2 Supreme Court justices, Justice Burke and Justice Davis. You're having District Judge Stephen Sharp and Circuit Court Judge Denise Now. On your ballot, you get to decide whether they get retained or not. Also, we have a constitutional amendment. We've got a handout for that. It also is on our website. And what the League does, we don't take position on, well, we haven't this year, on this constitutional amendment, which is whether to allow the governor to appoint and our state senate to confirm trustees for the University of Wyoming who are non-residents. Currently, they all have to be residents of the state. This would change our constitution and allow non-residents, it wouldn't require, but allow them to be trustees. So again, information on the table outside, also on our website, wyominglwv.org. And lastly, there's a book that I wrote for the League of Women Voters a few years ago called The Look at Wyoming Government. It's a real comprehensive look at local, state, and tribal government. It's a very comprehensive book, and we have several copies on the table outside, and we urge you to take a copy if you'd like one. And with that, we'll move along to introducing. Well, I'll introduce our moderator, and she'll carry it forward from here. Kathy Carpin is going to be our moderator. She helped us out for the primary forums as well, and she is an attorney here in Cheyenne. Carpin and White, and she was the Secretary of State for 2 terms, and I'd have the dates.
Never mind.
Okay.
They all know how old I am.
That's right. So she's a native of Rock Springs, and we're very happy to have her in Cheyenne. She's very politically wise, and I think she'll do a great job tonight, and I'll let her introduce the candidates and go over the format real briefly.
Thanks. What time do you want the festivities to wrap up here on this debate?
Well, about 6:45. You have 90 minutes.
Okay. By the way, I just feel like I need equal time on that last comment. You know your old one They used to say, I remember you from college. Then they say, you spoke at my high school commencement. The other day, a client said, I read about you in my 4th grade history book. So, I don't know how wise I am. I'm definitely old, but... now, for the introductions of our candidates, and we actually had a much bigger live audience when there was some suspense on the Republican side. But on our, well, of course you would know she'd be on our left. Jillian Balow is the Republican nominee for Superintendent of Public Instruction, and Mike Ceballos, the Democratic nominee for Public Instruction. And as they say, without further ado, except you took my instructions on how much time they get. Because, you know, if they were like me, we'd... See, this will be my last year in this particular role, but when they walk off with my cheat sheet, what am I going to do? Or I shouldn't say that in front of candidates for superintendent. All right, now, we have to decide who goes first. So, nobody has an idea, so I'm going to say, think of a number between 1 and 10. Jillian?
My son is 8. 8.
Mike?
7.
Well, it was 6. So, we're thinking along the same lines. Okay, Mike, you are going first. And here is the first question. What is the single most important lesson you've learned from the voters in this state during the campaign, and will that inform your policies going forward?
Okay. And one of the things, since you already gave us the questions, I think you asked us if we would have an opening statement. So I don't know if I am...
Well, this is what happens when you don't give me a script.
But I'm not trying to be difficult.
We'll hear about this on the streaming, whatever that is. All right. Okay, Mike, thank you for that correction. So you get to start anyway, because you picked the closer number. So you have 2 minutes for your introductory statement.
Well, again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters and everybody that's here for providing an opportunities for these forums. It's important for us to be able to reach out to the public, and this has been a great way to do it, so thanks. I am Mike Ceballos, and as you know, I'm running for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. For my career, 30 years, I was an executive in a large, complex corporation, and over the last 14, I represented Quest Communications here as the state vice president. During the campaign, we made a decision that we were going to go out and visit all 48 school districts. And we're now down to just 3 left. And it was a great idea for us to do that because we've really been so blessed with the information that has been shared. But within that, there's discussions about the role of the superintendent, but a lot of reflection that I've collected about my particular role with that. In general, the public is really concerned about the ongoing arguments and the lack of focus on outcomes. And what they've really told me is they like the fact that I'm a businessman, not a bureaucrat. They believe that we can get down to the brass tacks of how, again, do we refocus on our students, because that's what's most important to them. When I've talked with our educators, their concerns have been just the moving targets and the changing roles. And what they've asked there is that, Mike, we don't need another teacher. What we need in this is somebody that has administrative and leadership background. When I've talked to business folks, their real concern is how do we focus then on the boards. And what they've said is they love the past experience that I've had there. I'm Mike Ceballos. I'm a businessman, an administrator, and a proven leader, and I'm passionate about improving education in Wyoming.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
I should have brought a booster. I should have brought my own booster seat tonight, but I didn't. I, too, would like to thank the League of...
Just a second. Somebody have a dictionary? Or adjust that chair? Well, let's see if you can sit up to the job
We tried
here.
that last time, and we couldn't find anything. I need J.C. Penney catalogs.
Okay, we appreciate the handicap.
I too would like to thank the League of Women Voters and all of you for being here tonight. I do want to take just a moment to set the record straight with the voters this evening. Over the course of this campaign, my opponent has chosen to make this race a referendum about the past 4 years and continually suggests that simply because I'm a conservative woman that electing me would be a repeat of the last 4 years. And ladies and gentlemen, please don't let this misguide you. The election is about the future of education. It's not about the past. It's about my experience and my beliefs versus my opponents. I've spent 20 years in education and state government leadership. I've worked in and with 48 school districts during that time. I understand Wyoming education from my experience as a teacher in Wyoming classrooms, both large and small, to private consulting, to leadership and governance at the Wyoming Department of Education and other state offices. I'm also a Wyoming graduate, both of high school and college, and have my children in public school. I also have a successful executive leadership record. I've managed $100 million budgets, hundreds of employees across 28 offices in our state. I've streamlined bureaucracy. I've made government work more efficiently, giving taxpayers a better return on their investment and better services for citizens. We need a superintendent of public instruction that has the prerequisite knowledge and skill set to lead from day one in office. So as we discuss issues tonight, I ask you to focus your attention on which candidate not only has the substantive knowledge, but also the depth of understanding about the issues that we face in education. This is a critical and it's a complex time. And what brings me to you tonight is not simply an interest in education, but a lifelong dedication to children, families, and communities in our state.
Thank you. And since Mr. Ceballos went first on the opening statement, I'll direct the first question to Ms. Balow, and I will repeat it. What is the single most important lesson you've learned from the voters in this state during the campaign, and how will that inform your policies going forward?
Though I've always worked hard, running for office is definitely the hardest job that I have undertaken. I'm humbled by the process, and I'm grateful to all of the supporters across the state. I made it through a heated and contested primary, three-way primary, and now we're in a spirited general election, and I've learned so much about myself and my state. Here we had the questions in advance, and I was able to jot just a few lessons down. First of all, voters are smarter than we have been led to believe. They know the problems, they have ideas, and they have opinions. They have access to information instantly, and they want to weigh in on important education decisions. As a Republican, I share most of the values of Wyomingites regarding personal responsibility and liberty, regarding local control in government, and a belief that government is usually the problem and not the solution. I have a healthy skepticism for federal government. And education is one of those rare institutions where we're all stewards. So the most significant lesson that I've learned is that we really need to engage the public in important conversations and decisions. We unfortunately have not done a great job of that. A few people have made very big decisions on behalf of our state, and that will guide my policy making. We need to spend more time in communities, talking with the public, garnering input, and having them at the table in decision making.
Thank you. Mr. Ceballos.
The single most important lesson that I've learned is unfortunately how irrelevant our state entities have become in really instructing education and helping us move forward. One of the sad things that has occurred fairly often when I'm talking with the districts, and again have been out to 45, is they've said, Mike, we just don't call the Department of Education anymore. That's not where we go. We talk to each other. And that is really a scary thought. If we have gotten to a place where educational leadership has created a void, and then the arguments have started so regularly that we're not coming to conclusions that help our school districts move ahead, then what they're going to do is to say, and they are saying, I've got a student today that needs work. I've got parents that want us to do that. I've got boards that want our administrators to be able to get there. And we can't wait for you to be able to come up with your decision after these many years of arguments. It really tells me that there is a great need for leadership and to determine roles so that we can start moving ahead, because it is going to be critical for us to succeed that we are out of the arguments and focusing on outcomes for our students.
Now, as Ms. Herman stated, there's an optional 30-second rebuttal. Would either of you? Okay, so we'll move to question 2, and Mr. Ceballos, you'll take this one first. Is the Department of Education a place for superintendents to implement their personal convictions and agendas? What guidelines would you recommend? Explain.
No. The answer is clear for me. Part of the issue that we're going to have to focus on is, again, who do we serve? Who is the customer of education? And when you realize that the work of education happens in local districts with teachers, with students, and sometimes those teachers are parents, that what our focus really has to be if we're going to be successful is on those districts. And where I'm beginning to find that we can make great progress is that if we have the conversations at that local level, we can start to differentiate then the problems, the questions, the opportunities are there. So we can have great philosophies about how to operate an organization, but the work of education must reflect those local communities. And I think that is the critical piece that I've learned from this. And we do have to separate ourselves. We can't take into this position the idea that we're the smartest. I think what we have to take the idea forward with is we have to ask good questions and then learn to listen. And that's where we're going to come up with our best solutions.
Thank you. And Ms. Balow?
Yes, my personal convictions come from spending my life dedicated to children, families, and communities in our state. And certainly I'll take those convictions into the office of State Superintendent. We want our children to be able to read. We want them to learn how to socialize appropriately, to be successful in school and life, to graduate ready for a career, college, or the military. And those are convictions that I hold dear. At a community level, we want communities to support our children and families. We want our parents to be self-sufficient. We want generations to improve. We want to create a workplace that's conducive to Wyoming graduates. Those are all personal convictions that I'll take into the office. In terms of agendas, again, we do need to work on depoliticizing education at the state level so that the true success at the local level is what matters. Our education system at the state level has been the subject of a great deal of controversial politics over the past 4 years, and certainly it is an agenda to reduce those controversial politics by adjusting the tension and the checks and balances so that we can effectively move education forward. As a state executive in a large agency, I know that I'm out of time.
Thank you for respecting the timer. Who's unarmed? Do either of you want to exercise your option for a 30-second rebuttal?
I'm armed.
If not, then Ms. Balow, you get question 3 first. These are great questions. See, people think the League of Women Voters are cupcakes, but no, these are good. That second one there was good. And here we go. What are your plans to restore staffing at the Department of Education after the troubles of the past 4 years?
I would agree. These are excellent questions, and thank you again to the League of Women Voters. The WDE has functioned well in the past, and I know that because I was part of that work. Recently, I talked to a former superintendent of a large district, and his staff tracked parent phone calls over 4 years. Out of about 7,500 calls in 4 years, they reached out to the Department of Education 4 times for assistance. That is not the support system that any of us envisions at the state level. And so there definitely needs to be some restructuring at the Department of Education, but I know there to be excellent people at the Department of Education. I also know that there are excellent people out in school districts who are very willing to help with those efforts, either by serving on cabinets that I intend to convene, or I would like to borrow some of our professionals from school districts to help build the knowledge and historical capacity in the Department of Education. Where there are gaps, we will organize. Where there are strengths, we'll maximize. I've led through organizations. I've led through the merging of staffs and divisions, works, programming, budgets, and I know that we can get through this together. It is also very important that we establish a vision for staff and begin to build trust that hasn't existed for some time and move forward in education.
Thank you. Mr. Ceballos.
With this, the discussion has been with the districts about what do you think about the staff, and generally the discussion has been that these are good folks, but oftentimes the depth's just not there. They haven't been in the positions that long. And if you look, and the current superintendent did invite both of us to come in and visit with her, and we did talk about the staffing levels, what's happening. Right now, she is replacing or filling the jobs, so that my belief is all those jobs will be filled when we get there. The challenge is that when you look at the buckets of work, and there's about 6 different buckets, that the problem that we have is the depth just isn't there. We need to grow the capacity of these organizations. And what we've done in the past is a thing called loaned executives, and that's exactly reaching out to the school districts, to community colleges, to the university to say, do you have folks in these sets of works that you can do? Now, the problem is the districts are saying in some cases, I can't loan you a full-time person, but maybe we could get a cadre of people. And the opportunity there is then to make sure that we're having conversations between both the districts and the staff. Not only can we do professional development and grow the capacity, we're also going to be able to start that very important process of communication, listening, and working together. And that's what I would propose to do.
Thank you. Would either of you like to exercise the option for a rebuttal? Well, the sparks aren't flying yet. Okay. Mr. Ceballos, you get question 4 first. If you win, you will have a chance to lay out your agenda to the legislature to give policy direction and action you want legislators to take. What will you tell the legislature?
And this has been at the heart of the discussion with the districts. The problem that we have today with a lack of leadership that has been there for a long time, and there's lots of contributors to it, is then there is a void. And when there's void, then everyone comes into it, and it's created great role confusion. What we've been talking about is how do you establish a new vision, a shared vision for the state. And when you look at that, it kind of becomes the educational North Star, how you align yourself when you're in your work. And what we've really been talking about, the fact is that we need to work together collectively as those 48 districts, establish that vision, and go back to the legislature and say, is this what you were talking about? And the districts talk to their communities so that we really can get a clear idea of why we're here and what we're trying to achieve. Then we need to ask the legislature, let the experts, let the profession drive how to get there. And if we can start segregating those roles, we're going to have a great opportunity to make sure that we're reflecting our communities and our elected officials, but we're also best utilizing the resource we have, which is our profession. And it is so complicated and so nuanced that that's what we need to be able to make sure that we have good answers as we move forward.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
Well, the discussions with the legislature and other stakeholders have already begun. I've reached out to legislators since the beginning. I've been working with legislators over the past 8 years since I've been in state government, and even in a couple of capacities when I was teaching school. As a policy advisor at the governor's office, I had an opportunity to testify in front of, I think, about every legislative committee in the state. So I've worked with the legislators in our state, and I know how to get get things done. I know how to collaborate. I know how to assure that we have checks and balances in place to have rigorous debate, but have better outcomes as a result. So that's already begun, not only with the legislature, but with the State Board of Education and with local school districts. When setting out policy and moving forward, I think one very important factor will be to pull stakeholders together, including superintendents and partners in education, and set a vision for education. A 10-year plan, if you will, that's worked in other areas of state government. We have a state energy plan. We have a birth through 12th literacy plan that works very effectively and efficiently. And our state accountability ought to be part of that vision, which immediately brings our legislature into that process and gives us all collective responsibility as we move forward to common outcomes.
Thank you. Right on the money. Would either of you like to rebut?
Sure. One of the issues that we really have here, and we've been talking a lot about experience, and I've heard a lot of pushback around that experience. The fact of the matter is, my job when I came here in 1995 was to lobby both the legislature on a state level and a federal level. What I would really argue is the experience that I have over that period of time wasn't as a state employee for a small period of time, and even those state employees then have to get permission if they're going to talk to the folks. So the whole idea of I've talked to everybody is a little stretched out.
Thank you. Ms. Balow?
Well, the rules in the governor's office are much different, and as a state employee, we do not seek permission regarding talking to legislators. We do not lobby, we inform. The work that I've done with the legislature has always been on behalf of the people and not on behalf of companies.
Thank you. All right, question 5, Ms. Balow. We'll take this one first for you. Political discussions, including candidate forums of Common Core and science standards, contain many misunderstandings and just plain incorrect information about the standards themselves, how they were written, how they were adopted, and how they are being implemented in Wyoming. How much homework have you done to read the standards and get the facts? Is it possible to discuss academic standards without a political agenda? That's quite a question.
That is quite a question. Have to do my homework just to get through the question. Yes, I have read the standards. I'm a former English teacher, so certainly I've paid special attention to the English standards and special attention to the crosswalk that was completed several years ago regarding our old standards and our current standards. Yes, it is also possible to discuss academic standards without a political agenda. However, to do so, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we have lots of folks weighing in on this very important issue. So misconceptions, realities, misinformation, what have you, there are very strong views along a very wide spectrum regarding the Common Core. To ignore that spectrum, to ignore the public voice, would simply be irresponsible. I know that Mr. Ceballos and I are talking to the same people every day, and every single day folks are concerned about the Common Core standards for a variety of reasons. One thing that I never hear is that we don't want high standards for our kids. So there's our common ground. We all want high standards for our students. All 48 districts are implementing the Common Core state standards now as the Wyoming Content and Performance Standards. Again, Common Core. We have a starting point for going forward. We have a process, a timeline in place. What the state superintendent will be responsible for is collaborating with the state board and the public to assure a better process for adoption.
Thank you. Any rebuttal?
No. My response? First?
Pardon? He hasn't been a chance to answer. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. Well, it's been a long day, and there you go.
Well,
okay.
That's all right.
Well, I'm glad. No, actually, I just did that to see if they were paying attention. So. And they were. All right. Sorry.
No,
Mr.
no problem.
Ceballos.
Yes, so I have also had great opportunities to be involved with this. Under the prior administration, I was asked as a business person, not as a corporate executive, to help volunteer time to be able to support the idea of what these standards were, and served on the advisory board under Alan Moore. One of the things that Alan got used to me saying in those meetings at the end of the debate is, now how are we going to take that out and talk to our parents? How are we going to talk to our employers? How are we going to talk to our communities? Because they've got to understand. And it was a regular message, and it wasn't a message associated with a political campaign. It's my belief and feelings. The other thing, I've had great opportunity. I serve on the McCrell board, and we've been doing things for many years now, and some of the things that we produce, but really talking about the Common Core. And the real problem with this that we've got to realize is the standard, again, should be as high as we possibly can push it. But the issue is the work is around implementing that standard. And that's what the districts are telling me. We can tweak it, we can make changes, and at a district level we can filter it. But if you continue to change the standards, the problem is we'll never get a chance to implement it and see the results. They ask, please quit changing on too regular of a basis where we're going to go. Because if you don't know where you're going to go, every road can get you there.
Thank you. Now I'll ask. Any rebuttals?
I'll rebut.
Very good. Ms. Balow?
One of the problems with the process 4 years ago that my opponent served on a committee to adopt our current standards was that we built ownership before we built agreement that was broad enough to appease and solidify the standards in our state. At first, my opponent has not had any reservations about the standards nor the process. Of late, he has questioned the process and said that there are places we could make it better, and certainly that would be my intent.
Thank you. Mr. Ceballos?
And again, clearly the issue here isn't, as I said, before this political process, I was talking to our districts through the use of these advisory boards on how those standards needed to reflect. So the idea that this is something that came up new in the last couple of weeks is just not true.
Thank you. Now we'll turn to question 6. And Mr. Ceballos, question goes to you. Why do you think education is important in this state and in this country? Is it primarily about employment, or is there more at stake?
There's clearly more. The challenge that we have is change. Change happens every day, and that change that you have to face is the fact that you need some common levels, some foundation to grow from. And when you don't have that foundation, then you're not able to keep up with it. So whether you're a housewife, or you're a doctor, whether you're a father at home taking care of the kids, or you're a corporate executive, to be able to know those core levels of knowledge is important. But what we're really trying to do here is not test for content, but as a test for the skills ultimately. Do we have and have we given our students the ability to learn? Because that lifelong learner that we talk about is the skill I found in my business that was so critical. In all of those years, I hired lots of people, but unusually I looked back and said, I didn't hire them in the area that they got their degree. So why was a college degree so important for me? Because it reflected delayed gratification, the ability to set a goal, to put a plan together and to achieve it. And that's what I needed in a business, and that's what we need in our families and our communities. That's why I think we have to be focused on how we help our citizens learn to become adults and deal with change that they'll face every day in their lives.
Thank you. Ms. Balow?
Well, education really provides an opportunity for people to be confident when they express their views, their opinions, and their beliefs, thereby allowing them to become active citizens in our society and in other societies. We have an opportunity through education to provide the skills that are needed not only for employment but for success in life. So rarely will you ever hear me talking about success in a job or success in college or success in school school, you'll hear me talk about success in school and life, because that is truly what education is about. It opens a door to opportunity, and not just an opportunity in the workplace. Now let's scale that down to Wyoming and say that I'm a fifth-generation Wyomingite, and I'm proud that I have had an opportunity to attend Wyoming schools, graduate from the University of Wyoming, live here for 44 years, my whole life, and be prosperous. I want that for my children, my sixth-generation children. And education and partnerships through education are the only way to assure that. Partnerships with our industry, with our community resources, and with our college are so paramount. And as state superintendent, I hope to underscore and put a big spotlight on those partnerships and on that life education, that continuum for success in school and life. It's vitally important.
Thank you. Rebuttal. Anyone?
Not rebuttal as much as just, I think, a little bit of additional explanation. One of the things we have to know is that we've been looking at some of the career tech aspects in our schools as well. And there's a new thing of taking 3 career tech classes together, and they're calling it a concentration. And interestingly, this last year, we found out that students that had a concentration had a 20% higher graduation rate. We've got to make sure that we understand that education isn't just single direction. It is for all of our students and all of the opportunities they could have.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
No rebuttal.
Thank you. All right, now we are on question 7, and we'll begin with you, Ms. Balow. This is our last question. Good. I didn't hear that we were having audience questions, so this is good. Number 7. It seems much of the legislature's work in education accountability, academic facilities, and finances is based on a distrust of school districts to operate schools and manage finances responsibly. Please comment on the district's responsibility to the state and on legislative oversight, and what is the Department of Education's role? And I think, as I said, we'll go with you, Ms. Balow.
Again, one of those meaty questions that could take a half a day, but I'll give it a try in 2 minutes. I've watched closely as our legislature has undertaken the task of state accountability system. They've done so wisely, and I've found nothing but good intentions on their behalf. Likewise, I have found nothing but good intentions on behalf of our school districts to implement with integrity the accountability system as they know it. I think over the past 4 years, we've missed many opportunities for continued discussions and leadership from the state superintendent to improve our state accountability, to move further away from a federal accountability system, and to truly make the Wyoming accountability system unique to all 48 districts. I have a plan for that. I would like 48 districts to state what their reform or what their metric would be and work that into the accountability system. And again, I've reached out to legislators and visited about that. We have a lot of folks working on the accountability system that I know could make that happen. Legislators have made it abundantly clear, as have school districts, that we need an accountability system, as does any quality system. The Department of Education's role is clearly spelled out in the accountability legislation, and it really requires influence and leadership from the state superintendent's office, as well as collaboration with the legislature, school districts, the state boards, and others. And through this approach, through this collaborative approach, and through the Department of Education's, I'm out of time.
You are scrupulous about it. Well, that's good. Mr. Ceballos.
This has actually been the work that I've been doing now for the last 3 months, because it's critical. If we can't start a methodology of communicating and working together, if we have an adversarial role, then the problem of really having direct policy that's going to help influence where we're going to go is at issue. So in talking with the districts, what they've acknowledged is that we need to work together to create, again, this educational North Star, a shared vision. And what's interesting is after this discussion, it was the same recommendations that came out of a joint education committee that we needed to have a shared state vision. So the idea then of having roles and having clear signal that we can all nod our heads why we're here and what we're doing, and making sure the legislatures in our communities believe that starts to establish the trust that we need to regain. By backing up from there and then saying, so how do we do it? And acknowledging that that capacity is with our professionals. When you take your car in, you tell about the problem, but you don't ask them what equipment they're using. We need to do that same with our professionals and understand that they're the ones that have the capability of moving us forward. And that relationship, those shared roles and the defined roles can help us get there.
Thank you. Rebuttal.
Take it.
Ms. Balow?
At present, all school districts in Wyoming have at least 4 accountability systems under which they operate: a federal No Child Left Behind accountability system, the state accountability system, a framework or accountability system for accreditation, as well as their own district accountability system. It is further my intent not only to collaborate the work and move and improve the state accountability system, but also to assure that the other accountability systems work in conjunction with the state accountability system, and that the federal system is minimized.
Mr. Ceballos.
Yes, in one of the recent debates we've had, I've suggested and will follow through with asking for a waiver for the federal accountability system. Now, my opponent has said that we shouldn't do that, but the work of the accountability committee now has given us the basis that we can move forward. So this is a practical way of getting the federal government out of a place where they don't need to be, and to be able to improve our delivery of education and reduce some of the work that our schools are having to face.
Thank you. Now we have the wild cards. These are audience questions. First one is for you, Ms. Balow. How many years did you actually spend in a classroom teaching? Well, there are actually 2 questions here, so I don't think we can have 2. So we'll just ask that one. How many years did you actually spend in a classroom teaching?
I spent 10 years teaching.
How many years did you actually spend in the classroom teaching?
I spent 10 years actually teaching in the classroom.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Ceballos, how does, whoops, that's not, well, it looks like this is an open one, so we're going to ask this of you, Mr. Ceballos. How important is early childhood education? How does Wyoming do with that program? What would you do to improve early childhood programs?
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No.
We're just getting a word from my sponsor here.
All right. Early childhood is from all the research I've seen in my doctorate program, is one of the most critical things we can do. But the practical knowledge is when we were able to send our students, our son and daughter, to early education and the difference it made in their life. There's just not any more important work. The challenge we have in Wyoming, however, is there is a feel that we don't want to force that on people, that parents should be able to make that decision. So what we need to do is to find the best examples like Thermopolis, where they do have the program that they've implemented that actually over time has increased their kindergarten ready rates from the teens to the 80% level. We need to share those examples so that we can show parents why early education is valuable, and hopefully, again, get them asking for it rather than some mandate to do it. Again, mandates just don't work here, but we've got to figure out how we can show the benefits of early education to all of our families, because it's clear that the foundation of education is based on how well those students start.
Thank you. And since that question was not specific to either candidate, Ms. Balow, would you like to answer that? Do you want me to repeat it for you?
Please.
How important is early child education? How does Wyoming do with these programs? What would you do to improve early childhood programs?
The first question is a research-based question, and we know that early education is very important. I know as an elementary teacher that incoming kindergartners often come in with a span of 5 years, sometimes with the skills of a 2-year-old, sometimes with the skills of a 7-year-old, and that's an awfully big span to cover. So efforts to prepare students for kindergarten is vitally important. In my current role at the State Department of Family Services, I oversee the early care and education programs for the state. What that means is that we work with state agencies and communities to coordinate efforts, including the efforts in Thermopolis that we have worked with public-private partnerships to spread across our state. It is research-based. There are underpinnings that have grown legs all over the state, and I'm so grateful to have been part of that work. We've also identified funding streams, and at the state level really coordinated those dollars, informed legislators, and who then passed legislation this past session for a grant to go out to communities to fund coordinated community efforts for early education. I agree, it should not be mandated. We need to make sure that community efforts are honored. That's where the best work is being done, not at the state level, but we can support a framework.
Thank you. Rebuttal by either? All right, our next question from the audience, and I guess we'll start with you, Mr. Ceballos. We know from the testimony to the Select Committee that Wyoming Department of Education employees have experienced considerable turmoil in the workplace. What, in your experience, prepares you to deal with this?
One of the great things about working for this corporation that I have for so many years is that you really understand the fundamentals of how you work with subject matter experts. And that's what we have in our department. These are folks that are so knowledgeable about a subject that there isn't any way that you can have the answers for those questions. So what I've learned in that period of time is that the first thing you have to do is always find the best employees that you can get, and you want them to be much smarter than you are about that subject. The second thing you have to do is you have to really learn what's our standard? And our standard is that we're going to serve our sets of customers with that. But included in that means that we also, as we're developing and how to serve them, that you've got to listen. And that means it has to be a two-way dialogue. And I think it's going to be great fun in the department to have folks that really realize that they can argue with you, have different opinions, and you can still come out at the end of the day with an agreeable solution. And finally, what happens if you do this right is, and the cinch will come, is when one of those folks fail. And rather than throwing them under the bus and pointing the finger at them and saying, that's the problem, you take responsibility as the leader. And then you work with them about how do you make a better decision in the future? What did we miss? When you do that, I have found time after time that those people become dedicated workers, and they perform at a level that you just can't imagine. And it's been a great experience for me.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
Currently at the Department of Family Services, I oversee a staff of about 200 across our state. And one of the greatest compliments that I get on a regular basis is, we're really excited that you're running. Education needs you in the state superintendent's office, but we're really going to be sorry to see you go from the Department of Family Services. I value my employees. Many of the folks that are at the Department of Education now are former colleagues. Some of them are present colleagues. Our work still intertwines on councils and in different programs that we run. They are calm right now, and they are ready for change. That's a great place to go in and not only calm the waters and heal a fractured system, but move forward with the excellent employees that exist at the Department of Education. One thing that I have always done as a leader and as a manager is value my staff, and that's no different. That's common knowledge among not only my staff but all of my colleagues, that we work together. I rarely make unilateral decisions, because being a good leader is one thing. Being a great leader is really empowering the folks who you work with to make important decisions and supporting them in those decisions. I know that the department is nervous about change, but I think that they are much calmer knowing that they have a good candidate.
Well, those were positive answers for both of you. Any rebuttals? Okay, now we'll go to the next question from the audience. And we start with you, Mr. Ceballos, so this time it'll be Ms. Balow. You both are concerned about too much classroom time being used for state testing. What would you change? How would you get usable data to teachers within a month or less so they can help students with identified learning deficits? That's another hard one.
That is another hard one. I've spent a lot of time as a teacher and as an education leader, and while I was getting my master's degree in education on studying assessment, we have to have measurements. We have to have assessments to test in education two things in particular. First of all, student performance. Second of all, the health of our system. In education, we have three general types of assessment. We have formative assessment that takes place every single day in every single classroom across our state, across our nation. This is that information that the teacher gets on a regular basis, and he or she adjusts their teaching to make sure that students are successful through pre-teaching, reteaching, or providing interventions. So giving information to teachers in a timely manner is already happening. Then there are summative assessments, and those are typically localized as well. And those really get to the heart of, is the student performing on a particular set of or time, a set of instruction, set of learning, or a time period. And again, those are localized, and those give information to teachers and students and parents immediately. Then there's the evaluative, and that's where we start getting tripped up. PAUSE, which usually comes out in the results come out in the summer, came out months after it was given and really provides very little usable data for the school districts and very little for the state as a whole.
Thank you. Would you like me to repeat the question for you?
There was about three questions in there.
It's a little long, yes. But it's good question. You both are concerned about too much classroom time being used for state testing. What would you change? How would you get usable data to teachers within a month or less so they can help students with identified learning deficits?
Okay. What's interesting is embedded in this question really is some of that idea we talked about of letting our professionals design this process. We've had this discussion before, and it was around delayed results from YCAS and PAUSE. We just said we're doing the test in the spring and getting the results in the fall. And so, again, there wasn't leadership, so the legislature said, we'll take this on. And what they passed is a rule that said we're only going to do multiple choice tests. And that's great for getting data out. But when you talk to teachers, they roll their eyes and say, we've got to have more than that. The problem that we have here is deciding how to do it. And that's what's embedded in this question. If we want to get a good system of testing, we're going to have to go out to our districts and work with the Department of Education and those experts in the field to really design a system that does that. And all the elements that my opponent talked about are things that need to be included in that discussion. But for me, the critical part is to understand that the best answer for how to deliver that is going to come from our school districts and the experts in that, not from myself or not from somebody in the legislature. And it's that role clarification, if we can do it, that I can think best would answer this question.
Thank you. Any rebuttal by either? Ms. Balow?
The evaluative test, or what we have as PAUSE right now, is a test that's typically designed at a much higher level than those formative or summative assessments that take place. And in order to do that, it's important for the state superintendent to work with vendors, nationwide vendors typically. I've led that process at the Department of Family Services, and it's a long and arduous process, and it is necessary when checking the health of our evaluations or of our education system as a whole.
No, okay. Question 12, and let's see, we'll start with you, Mr. Ceballos. As superintendent, what will be your role on the State Board of Education in approving state standards and implementing them?
Clearly, one of the great opportunities I had was just a few days ago. The state board did meet on this. And one of the discussions that they had there was the whole idea that the law today requires that the standards be reviewed every 5 years. What they talked about, however, is the need for there to be longevity of that standard so that once it's turned into instruction, how do we see that it's working? And so their idea was we will at year 4 review our standards again. But what we're going to do is then think about, are they okay? Do we need to change them? Or can they wait? Are they still appropriate? If we are going to change them, then we'll start in that year 5 to make that decision and then take the next 3 years. So their idea of elongating the process so we really have stability with that standard is a great idea. And they then talked about that won't require any new legislation. It really does reflect what the districts are asking for. And the other idea they had in it that is super is they said, let's also break up when we look at subjects so that we're not again doing math and language art at the same time, which then creates a huge capacity need out of our districts. So I think it's just listening, working, and reflecting the district's ideas and thoughts back with the state board and being just a partner, not an adversary.
Thank you. Ms. Balow.
Would you mind repeating the question,
Not at
please?
all. As superintendent, what will be your role on the State Board of Education in approving state standards and implementing them?
Well, the State Superintendent of Public Instruction does have that responsibility, that constitutional responsibility to provide general supervision to public education. That means that you are the chief advocate and expert in education. What I know is that school districts across the state are already doing this work. So really what it amounts to is utilizing the role of state superintendent, the State Board of Education, as a vehicle for moving that forward and as a vehicle for assuring that we have public input. Historically, the state superintendent has provided that leadership not only to the school districts and to the public at large, but also to the State Board of Education. Again, that's a component that's been missing for several years, and there's a diminished and damaged relationship there that needs to be built. So certainly that is part of this process as well. The State Board adopts. The Department of Education certainly is a linchpin in making sure that that process runs smoothly and is as transparent and public and inclusive as possible. And again, reaching out as the state superintendent to the local school districts to leverage the work that they're already doing in this area.
Thank you. Any rebuttal on that one? Okay, the next question, which is the second part of the one that I set aside, and we talked about multiple choice. This sounds like true or false, but you get 2 minutes. And let's see, we're going to start with you, Ms. Balow. The question is, do you support Common Core?
That is not a yes, no, true, false question. I support high standards. As an elected official, I represent the public. There is a lot of concern about the Common Core. I've had concerns about the Common Core from the beginning. Those need to be addressed with caution and with transparency and a public process. And if it isn't, it is irresponsible.
Mr. Ceballos.
Yes, I do support the Wyoming state standards that we've adopted back a couple of years ago for both math and language arts. And again, the idea behind this is if you look at what's recently happened with the results we've just gotten back from the first test of this, that it's clear that the standards were so much higher that we've seen that our scores have come down. So when you really, when you think about what you're trying to do with standards, you're trying to make sure at the highest possible level we can push, we're asking our students to achieve that. And the critical need for that is because of the complexity of our environment today. Whatever role you take as an adult, you need to have as much as we can possibly push. So those standards are really good. Now, the question becomes, but what happens if folks don't like them, and were they forced on us? And that's clearly part of the conversation we need to be having, because they aren't forced on it. It is our choice. And when we have a Board of Education that adopts them. That gives the first step. The second piece then is then how do we let our districts implement them? And there are great filters to make sure that our community's values, beliefs, and aspirations and concerns are reflected. And that's why we should have confidence that these standards aren't the end all. They're just the start of the real work, and we should have confidence that we can continue with them.
Thank you. Rebuttal?
I'm concerned that my opponent is willing to plow ahead when there is so much concern about Common Core. There, is certainly an opportunity for a state superintendent to continue continue having our state embroiled in conflict by plowing ahead. The smarter approach would be to slow down and cautiously include the public in a transparent and inclusive process regarding the standards.
Thank you. Mr. Ceballos?
Again, it's the constant flurry of words over here. That I did not say that what we should do is just adopt standards and then not talk to the public. What you've heard me say consistently through the evening is that our students have to have their parents involved, have their communities involved if we're going to get better. And the idea somehow, because I support common standards that we're using, would mean I don't want to listen to parents is just a little silly.
Any more questions? Okay, we're running out of time, and I forgot the opening, but we won't forget the closing. And I believe we started with Mr. Ceballos, so this time we'll start Ms. Balow for your closing. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you again, League of Women Voters. This job is too important to entrust to someone who hasn't had boots on the ground experience in education. It's absolutely essential to elect a state superintendent with comprehensive experience in education and in leadership. My leadership and my education spans 10 years in the classroom and 8 years in state government leadership. And as I continue to travel across the state, I'm honored to have the support of so many Wyomingites. And this is what they say. Business leaders point to my executive experience and my success managing $100 million budgets and hundreds of employees across the state. I've made government work more efficiently. Educators point to the fact that my education experience is incredibly comprehensive and that it's absolutely essential to the job of state superintendent, that we do not have time for on-the-job training, and that I am well equipped to hit the ground running on day one without that training. And parents point to the fact that I'm a Wyoming graduate, have my children in public schools, and as a teacher, I'm willing to stand strong with them against encroachment of government on our ability to control the education of our children. I have dedicated my life personally and professionally to children's families and communities across our state. I became a teacher because I wanted to make a difference, and I have. I became a leader because I wanted to make a difference, and I have. I would be honored to have your vote as state superintendent because I intend to continue making a difference, and I will. Again, my name is Jillian Balow, and I ask for your vote on November 4th.
Thank you. Mr. Ceballos.
Well, again, I think here I'm going to have to push back because we continue to talk about experience. And what the districts, administrators, and teachers are telling me, that this job doesn't need a teacher. What it needs is a proven leader, an experienced person. And Ms. Balow, again, talks about her experience. But really, what that amounts to in leadership is 2 years in the current job she's been working. If that's experienced leadership, then we can redefine some of the other questions. But I believe what this job needs is leadership that has proven over time, and that's what I've done. Over the last 18 years, I've worked on policy for education for all 3 governors and for all superintendents that have been in the office. I think that's what counts. When you really look at the need to have leadership to manage departments, that's what I have done, managing groups of 800. And when she talks about $100 million that she's managed, I've managed hundreds of millions of dollars in that base. So this idea that somehow I don't have experience as a teacher means that I'm not qualified for this position, again, is just silly. It's not what folks are telling me. I have had the same talks with parents. Parents are saying, can you help us get out of this chaos? And what I will commit to is that's absolutely where we need to go. We've got to stop arguing and start focusing on outcomes. For all those folks in the school districts, I'm committed to you so that we can see that the plans we put into place and the work you do result in being able to have our students learn more. And to all of those businesses, I have the experience from many years to serve on the boards, and I'm confident that those are the skills that you've told me are needed for this office. I'm Mike Ceballos. Again, I'm a proven leader, and I'm passionate about improving education in this state. And I'd appreciate your vote on November 4th. You can go to mikeforeducation.com to get more information.
Thank you. And now we can ask the audience if you'd like to applaud and thank our candidates. Very good statements. Very good job.
That's it.
Here to just give some background about the League of Women Voters, introduce our moderator, and this is the second half of the evening, so we have our candidates for governor here, and I'll have the moderator, Mary Guthrie, introduce them later. Right now, I just want to give some introductory remarks about the League. The League of Women Voters of Wyoming, and we have local leagues in Laramie, Cheyenne, Casper, and Gillette. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, non-sectarian organization who really tries to focus on helping people get involved with their government. And so a lot of our activities focus on making information available on which voters can rely to make their decisions. We are a trusted source of information for lobbyists, for other people in government, for voters, and for everyone else, because we are nonpartisan. We're political, but we are nonpartisan. So we've been, this is the last of several forums that the League of Women Voters has sponsored for Laramie County and statewide candidates, and we just really appreciate everyone who's here tonight, who's streaming live online, and who can watch these forums. They're recorded and are archived on the League of Women Voters website, which you can see on the banner up there, www.wyominglwv.org. We will have those up in about a couple of days. That's usually how long it takes. You can watch these and tell your friends about them. And we just we hope everyone will be, as we say, be informed and vote. So before we start the actual forum, I just want to point out a couple of things that are on the website, and we have some hard copies on the table outside here. First of all, there will be a constitutional amendment on your ballot, and it was passed by the legislature in 2013, and it would allow the governor to appoint a non-resident on the University of Wyoming trustees. And of course, these appointments do have to be confirmed by the state Senate. So it's permissive, but it would change that on the ballot, and remind everyone that if you don't vote on this, but you do vote on the other issues, it is counted against the yes votes. So a non-vote is like a no vote, and you do need a majority of yes votes on amendment to pass. So if you go on the website, again, wyominglwv.org, you will find a guide that will list a lot of, we call it a pro-con flyer, and it's all the arguments that have been mentioned for and against. So you can read the pros and cons, make up your own mind, but please do vote. Also on the website, and hard copies out here, is about retention of judges. There are 9 judicial districts in the state. In each judicial district, will vote periodically on retaining judges in that district, and also everyone will vote on judges up for retention for Supreme Court. We pick our judges based on merit. It's called the merit selection, and it's done by a judicial commission and the governor. But after that, we, the voters, get to say whether the judges stay on the bench or not. So you can check the website or check the copy out there. It describes the system we have. You can find out from the map which district you live in, and then there's a list of the judges up for retention in your district. On the website, it links directly to a judicial poll that the Wyoming State Bar has taken. Lots of information by attorneys about the judges, about knowledge of the law, and the way they deal with juries and with attorneys. So it is good information, in addition to any other information you might have about the judges. So moving on to more about tonight, I will let our moderator introduce the candidates and give the format. So I will introduce the moderator. She is Mary Guthrie, longtime attorney in the state. She worked for the Attorney General's office in Wyoming, and currently she is adjunct faculty at Laramie County Community College. So I'll turn the microphone over to Mary. Thank you.
And thank you, Marguerite, and thank you, members of the League and members of the public, and most especially thank both of you. It's always so wonderful to appreciate the fact that we have such accessibility to candidates. And I also want to thank you both for running. I can't imagine anything more bruising than the several months of campaigning that you've had. So this is going to be a wonderful evening. The format is as follows. Each of you will have 2 minutes for an opening, and then there will be questions that have been prepared by the League that you will have 1.5 minutes within which to answer, and then you have 30 seconds if you would like to rebut your opponent's answer, and then there will be questions from the audience, and then finally there will be a 2-minute closing. So are you all ready to go?
Sure. I am.
I'd like to introduce Pete Gosar, who's on the left, and Don Wills, who's on the right, and Mr. Gosar is running on the Democrat ticket. Mr. Wills is running as an independent. Governor Matt Mead declined to be here tonight. He's running as a Republican. And Dee Cousins, who's running as a Libertarian, had a conflict tonight and couldn't be here. So again, let's just proceed, and I'm going to make the decision that the first opportunity to say anything will go to Mr. Wills, and you may use 2 minutes then to tell us a little bit about yourself or your campaign.
Sure. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity for me and my opponents to have discussions about issues that matter to the people of Wyoming. I am a businessman. I am a computer expert. I have a degree in computer engineering. I started a business with my business partner almost 40 years ago, not quite 40 years ago. And he wanted out about 10, 11 years ago, and so I bought him out. So I am the sole owner of a national software company. I actually own a smaller company too, but national software company that we have built up to be 80 employees spread across the country. And so I understand what it takes to actually run a business, to make a payroll, to build something new, to have the foresight to see where to go in the future. I'm not a bureaucrat, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a politician. And that may be a problem for somebody because you don't think I have the experience to be governor of the state of Wyoming. I think I have the experience. I've hired probably more than 250 people in my career, fired a few. I think I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I think that's reflected by the fact that my company has been and is successful today. I am a good judge of where the world is going to be, what we have as challenges facing us, and I hope that we can discuss as many of those challenges that we can tonight. My two biggest issues are, one, overspending by the state of Wyoming, and 2, federal encroachment into the affairs of the state of Wyoming. Those are the 2 issues that really got me into this race.
Thank you, Mr. Wills. Mr. Gosar?
Well, thank you and good evening. My name is Pete Gosar and I am running for governor. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and you, Ms. Guthrie, for helping us out tonight, and everybody in the crowd. It is important, and it's not wasted on me, but most of all, I'd like to thank the people of Wyoming who welcomed me into their house or onto their porch and shared with me the stories and their insight into what it's like to be a person in Wyoming in many different ways. And I think tonight you'll see that this is a real difference. There's a difference here, and there's a real choice to be made. I'd like to thank Mr. Wills for showing up. I think that's 90% of the battle, is to show up, and I wish the other 2 would have been here, but that's not so new. So what do you do when you want to become governor? You have to establish trust with people, and you have to provide leadership. And I think those 2 have been critically missing. In my campaign, as in my life, and as I learned on the fields of UW, if you want trust, you earn it. And so how do you earn it? You provide access to people. And we've done that every day in my campaign. We have access not only on your front porch, but in your communities and your events. Access through social media, where we take any question anytime. And then you take an honest approach to things. You don't poll test your positions. You tell people what you think. It's respectful to people, and that's how solutions come. And we're in short supply in solutions in Wyoming today, as the 31 lawsuits attest. And we do need to have solutions. And then you hustle, and you work. And that's important. I like this old basketball saying, how do you get from where you are to where you want to be? You got to have a dream. You got to have a vision, and you got to be willing to work for it. Tonight, as we answer questions, I'll tell you what I believe and what my vision is for Wyoming. We have great people, and we have a great opportunity. And right now, we need somebody to drive the bus. Thank you very much.
I failed to introduce perhaps one of the more important persons in this event is Pat Hayes, who's our timer, and I'm sure that you both will pay a great deal of attention to the fact that she is driving this bus, as Mr. Gosar said. Question number 1, and it'll be directed to Mr. Gosar. What is the most significant lesson you've learned from the voters in this state during this campaign, and how will that inform your policies going forward?
I think the most important lesson that I learned in this campaign, that I've learned in life, is how can you lead without asking? How can you lead without approaching? How can you lead without listening? And in my campaign, when we talk it, we walk it. And so we've hit 20,000 doors. And a lot of those have been mine. Where you ask a person, say, it doesn't matter to me whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent. I'd like to know where you think we could do better. What's your solution? And those nuggets have been great, and they've been inspiring. And I wish more people would take that opportunity. When you're the governor, you're in charge of the health and welfare and safety of Wyoming's people. And I think for me, it all comes back to people. How do you apply those lessons that people have learned collectively? We're much better than independently. And I try, an honest attempt to ask people and to take their opportunities to engage, because I've learned so much on those doorsteps. I've learned so much in those events. Those solutions have come where they might not have come. And for me, that is the goal and the key to this, is to listen to people and really listen, honestly address their problems and their ideas, and then bring them back and craft them into a solution that would work for the rest of Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Wills, what is the most significant lesson that you have learned during this campaign, and how will that inform your policies going forward?
The thing that probably surprised me the most, I'm not a known face, so I talk to people and I might start mentioning something about politics or government or something without telling them, and I'm running for governor. And so I've gotten quite a number of people to engage, and the thing that struck me, and I knew this was an issue, but really struck me the most, was how disengaged the voters are. And I know the League of Women Voters has been trying since its inception to keep people engaged. Good for you guys, girls, whatever. The reality is, I think the engagement level is as low as I've ever seen. I'm 64 years old. Back when I was in college, there was some engagement. Wasn't all friendly, but there was some engagement. And today, the voters in Wyoming just are not engaged. And one of the things that came to me that I really understood is they don't have a clue what's actually going on. And so the concept of transparency, which I had highlighted in my campaign literature, actually has gone up to one of the highest, if not the single highest, most priority for my gubernatorial, if I'm elected to governor, because we need to be able to tell and communicate to the people really what happens in Cheyenne and across our state. And in the rebuttal, I hope I get a little rebuttal. I'll tell you more specifics about my ideas.
In fact, now, Mr. Gosar, if you want a 30-minute rebuttal, you may have it.
30 minutes. I've only got about 30 seconds, Mary.
It has been a long day for me as well. Thank you.
Well, you know, I disagree fundamentally with Mr. Wills, and I think that many politicians bear the responsibility. If we all look the same, if we all go to the polls to figure out what we want to tell you in Gillette, and then we change that for Jackson, and then we change it again once again in Laramie, how's the voter to know? How's a voter to expect that when you become governor that you just won't change again? And I think that's a fundamental difference. I have not changed my positions fundamentally since I began this in May. And I think that is, if you want something different, you've got to be different. And that's the fundamental difference in our campaign.
And Mr. Wills, you have a 30-second rebuttal as well.
Yes, I don't blame the voters for this engagement. Quite frankly, I blame the bureaucrats and the politicians more than I blame the voters for that. And as far as transparency, if I'm elected governor, every purchase order, every check that's written, money that's transferred, and every contract that is entered into will be on a website within 24 hours of it being created. That's real transparency, and I will try to make that happen as governor.
Thank you. So let's move to question number 2, and it's Mr. Wills. Leadership has emerged as a topic of the gubernatorial campaign. What do you mean when you use that term, and how would you carry out that leadership as governor? What is the governor's role in relation to the legislature and to his political party?
Well, I don't have a political party, so there's no relationship there. I truly am an independent. For your information, I'm the first independent to run for governor and be on the ballot in Wyoming since 1958. To me, that's a really sad reflection on the way our state is governed. We really are a state of D's and R's, and now it's mostly R's, although used to be more D's than there are today. Leadership is about having a vision and then saying, okay, guys, we're going to go do this. We're going to go do that. So, yeah, you got to listen to your soldiers, but you also have to think outside the box. Steve Jobs was a leader. And you know what he did not do? He did not market test with consumer groups any product that he ever created. And the reason he didn't do that was because he said, consumers don't know what they want to buy 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now. I'm going to give them a choice, and I think I know what they might want to do, and so I can give them what I think will be the best and that they'll sell a lot of. Well, the reality is that's what a leader is. Yeah, you have to listen to your soldiers, you have to listen to the people, but a real leader has vision and says, let's go do it, and I think I can do that.
Mr. Gosar, do you want me to reread the question again?
Would you please, Mary?
I would certainly be delighted. Leadership has emerged as a topic of the gubernatorial campaign. What do you mean when you use that term, and how would you carry out the leadership as governor? What is the governor's role in relation to the legislature and also his political party?
Well, leadership for me, especially in the governor's office, means that you take the role and you take the onus to solve problems. Politicians come and go, but policy really matters. These are solutions for people's lives, and you have to take that as your charge. You have to show up. I think it's instructive that there are only 2 here tonight. I wish there were more, because this is an opportunity to compare and contrast. So leadership, you take the hard issues. You find to communicate the challenges and the opportunities. And then you gather around yourself those great people. And there are many people in Wyoming that are willing to help. But you have to listen. And the best ideas have to win. And I think too often right now in Wyoming today that's not happening. There's a small group that has always made the rules. And there's a bunch of the rest of us on the outside. I think that's limiting to our state. We have a great opportunity in education and healthcare and many other ideas in economics, but we're just not getting there. How do you work with the legislature? You work like you do with anybody else. You say, I want to work with you, but these are lines in the sand that we can't go past. Let's find a way forward. Let's work on solutions. When you deal with your political party, well, you're the governor of all of Wyoming, and you make that straightforward to the Democrats in my case. I am the governor of Wyoming. I'm working on solutions for Wyoming. And I think that that's pretty straightforward, and I think that's pretty well expected. And I look forward to the opportunity to have that leadership role.
Okay, Mr. Wills, you indicated you'd like to rebut that.
No, not rebut, just reinforce one of the comments that Mr. Gosar made about there being two classes of people in the state of Wyoming. I call it the good old boy network and the rest of us. And everybody in this room knows it's real. Nobody likes to talk about it because it's the good old boy network that hands out the goodies. I will run against the good old boy network, against the corporations, against the unions, against the interests that are not in favor of the state and the people of the state of Wyoming.
And Mr. Gosar, you have a 30-second rebuttal as well.
Well, I think that leadership also requires that you're the first to show up and the last to lead. Last to leave, excuse me. A governor or a leader is always the model of how work is done. And work ethic for me is very important. And those leaders that I've known in Wyoming, that was that characteristic. They showed up early and they stayed late, and they valued people's opinion.
Thank you. Now, question number 3, you better pay close attention because this is a zinger. Political discussions, including candidate forums of Common Core and science standards containing many misunderstandings and outright factual errors about the standards, how they were written, how they were adopted, and how they are being implemented in Wyoming. What have you done to learn about the Common Core? And this question goes to Mr. Gosar first.
Well, I've had the great opportunity of being on the State Board of Education, where many people who developed and implemented the Common Core, and we're hopefully trying to implement the next generation science standards, testified. And so you have that opportunity. And also I went to my district. I represent Albany, Sweetwater, and Carbon County. And I talked to as many teachers, K through 12, and in higher ed, and said, what do you think about the Common Core? What are the strengths and what are the weaknesses? I think you have to read. And so I have read through all the Common Core and all the next generation science standards. And then I've had the great opportunity to talk to people on both content committees to have a general sense of why they believed the way they did. I want people to understand that these content committees worked for a year and a half, and these are some of our greatest educational minds in Wyoming today, not only K through 12, but higher ed. And they unanimously brought those to us. And then you read the comments. We had a 9-month comment section on the Common Core. I think that's not well understood. There were thousands of comments, and I read through every one of them. And so you have an opportunity to understand the process, you understand the Common Core and the reason the educators like it. And then you read through it and say, you know, these are the minimum standards for our kids. Districts can go above and beyond, and we recommend it all the time at the State Board that they do. And so I think that those common myths, they evaporate once education becomes key and essential to understanding the Common Core and the next generation science standards.
Fine. Mr. Wills, I'll read the question again. Political discussions, including candidate forums of Common Core and science standards, contain many misunderstandings and outright factual errors about the standards, how they were written, how they were adopted, and how they are being implemented in Wyoming. What have you done to learn about the Common Core?
Well, first of all, the implicit assumption in that question is that somehow the negatives that are being thrown at Common Core are not right. I disagree. I think there are some really fundamental problems with both how Common Core was created and where it is and where it's attempting to take our country. With respect to the question, how do I know about this thing? I have a daughter who's in her middle 30s. She has a master's degree in English education from Northwestern University. She has my two granddaughters. She has 2 daughters. She taught in the Chicago public school system. She has been in education all of her life. When she was in middle school, the University of Chicago math standards were dropped onto her school, to her and her sister, younger sister, in 7th and 8th grade. And that was the basis for what is today the math portion of Common Core. And it destroyed their ability to keep up because it turns out the other junior highs that were feeding into a large suburban high school in Chicago where they went to school were the old-fashioned way. Both my daughters never caught up in math. The University of Chicago math is Arnie Duncan, who was head of the Chicago public school system, who is now head of the Department of Education, who is giving money away to those states who take Common Core money. And that's wrong.
Mr. Gosar, do you have a rebuttal to that comment?
30 seconds is not enough to that. First of all, the Common Core was internationally benchmarked, and it was used by citizens and educators throughout, and it was developed in over years. And so I take great issue with that. I take great issue with the fact that it's a federal mandate. It's not a federal mandate. In fact, the race to the top that people often talk about, it says a common set of standards. It says nothing about Common Core. These are just some of the factual misinformation that people like Mr. Wills and others who don't understand the Common Core or who don't want to try to understand the Common Core, and it muddies the water on what are standards that we need for our kids today. Thank you.
And thank you. Okay, Mr. Wills, do you have a rebuttal to that?
I understand the Common Core, okay? And to try to pretend like these things were created by local communities is completely a lie. There was not a single educator at the K to 12 level that was involved in the math standards. They were all ivory tower college professors from Princeton, from the testing services, and and paid for largely by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Those are facts. You cannot get away from the facts. So the Common Core standards are bad.
Well, it's nice to have a difference of opinion.
There'll be more, I think.
Makes it far more interesting. Question number 4, first of all, goes to Mr. Wills. Wyoming has a chance to provide health insurance for some low-income residents through a variation of Medicaid at little cost to the state, about 10%. How important is health insurance to people, providers, hospitals, local and state government? First question. The second prong of that question, should Wyoming try to get as many people as possible insured?
There's a major player missing from that question, the federal government, okay? And that 10% number, that's in year 1 only. I'm the only candidate running for governor who is unequivocally opposed to the federal Medicaid expansion program, which is really just Obamacare. It was part of Obamacare. It's only by an accident of the absolutely ridiculous Roberts decision that found Obamacare constitutional that they also then separated out this thing today we call Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion is simply taking away all authority for the state of Wyoming to decide on eligibility, on payment levels, on everything. It's a Trojan horse. It's money that if we take it, the strings that come with it could bury Wyoming in 5 years. Because in year 1, the federal government says they'll pay all but 10%. Year 2, all but 20%. Year 3, all but 30%. It goes on and on. The reality is I don't trust the federal government to make it to year 2 and not renege on their commitment or change the rules or tell us we have to do the bureaucratic half and they're only going to pay the doctors or whatever, on and on and on. You can try to negotiate with the devil, but you know what? You're probably going to come out on the short end of it, and that's why I'm opposed to Medicaid expansions. That's not to say I don't think the state should be involved. I think it should be. We can do it. We have the money to do it. We just don't need the federal Leviathan on top of us.
And Mr. Gosar, would you like me to read the question again?
No, I think I have the gist of it.
These are complex, not simple statements.
That's all right. Where to begin with Mr. Will's discussion? First of all, Medicaid expansion. Through the first 3 years is 100% paid by the federal government. The next 3 years, 90-10, 90% federal government, 10% from the state. So let's have that correction right off the top. And it operates just like our regular Medicaid program where the state has equal input with the federal government. Another point of contention. But let's talk about people when we talk about Medicaid expansion and the 17,600 people that have not had health insurance for the last 4 years. Now, the governor will tell you, and Mr. Wills will agree, that, we're getting a better deal. Let's get the best deal we can. But I'd love to hear them tell that to the lady I met in Rollins who's been waiting for a couple years to have that test to wonder if she has cancer or not. This is brutal. If the governor does not like Medicaid, and we get it, he does not. What was his plan? There were 5 plans on the Wyoming Department of Health's website. 5 plans. He was given 2 more plans with a trigger, a 1-year exception, and he chose none of them. What was his plan? This is the failure of leadership and the reason I run today. These are 17,600 of our workers. Those are hospitals in Rollins and Thermopolis that are barely alive, barely staying afloat. These are real critical issues, and the governor cannot play politics with something as essential as a person's health.
Thank you. Do you have a rebuttal to that, Mr. Wills?
Sure. I appreciate the fact that both myself and my opponent at this table actually are clear on this issue, because Governor Meade is not. He has straddled this issue, and I don't know which side he's actually on. So the problem I have isn't with the honest progressive to my right. The problem I have is with the progressive who's sitting in the Capitol tonight and isn't here at this forum.
Okay. All right, so question number 5, first of all.
Mary, can I have a rebut to that?
Yes.
I think that this is an opportunity to have a wider discussion in Wyoming, and what is the governor's role? Is the governor's role to be reelected, or is the governor in it for the health, welfare, and safety of the people of Wyoming? This is a clear one. $860 million of economic development, $200 million that would be helped with uncompensated care, hospitals that will go out of business or not go out of business. Why did the governor choose not to have a plan? This needs to be ferreted out, and I'm tired of the answer, we don't think the federal government would pay. Well, we don't worry about education, we don't worry about health care, or Department of Transportation dollars when it comes to that federal government.
Thank you, and thank you for keeping me on track, Mr. Gosar. Question number 5 does go to you. The price of crude oil is dropping and is less than $85 a barrel. What does that mean for Wyoming? What financial challenges do you foresee for our state?
Well, I think initially you look at it from a personal perspective, and that reduces the amount of money they have to spend on the pump, and they have more money to use at their communities and at their table and for health insurance. But by and large, you also know what that means to the state government. We are an undiversified economy, and we need to find a way forward. We'll see as the price of oil continues to weaken, and then there is no idea that it will come back anytime soon. There are projections it'll be low for 2 years. What will happen to state revenues? That has to be concerning to people, and it has to be concerning if our economy is not diversified. And then if it stays low for multitude of years. I'm a son of an oil field worker. I am personally familiar with what happens to communities and families, and when that happens. And so I think the last 4 years we have dithered away while we had an opportunity to diversify our economy at the local level with small mom and pops that really give ourselves a diversified economy, and we just didn't use that time wisely.
Okay, and Mr. Wills?
I agree we have not, I know what it's about, thanks. I agree that we have not used the money wisely, that oil at $85 or $55 or $35 like it went to in the 2007-2008 timeframe is going to be a disaster for the big spenders that sit over in the Capitol and sit in the governor's seat. And I have created a newspaper that shows all of my various issues. It's 8 pages. You'll notice the headline on the front page with the picture of the jet that Pete gets to fly around in. He's a pilot for. Wyoming government spending out of control. Well, the question that's going to be asked when spending or when revenues go down because oil price is going to go down, coal is going to be restricted either by the federal government from export or by just fiat from the EPA, that one of two things is going to happen. Either we're going to cut spending drastically in this state, or we're going to raise taxes. And they're starting to talk about an income tax in this state. And if they put an income tax in this state, you can say goodbye to all diversification. Because other than the income tax, Wyoming taxes are just about average. Some are worse, some are better. And the reality is it would be a terrible thing if we went down the path for increasing taxes.
Okay, Mr. Gosar, do you have a rebuttal to that?
I certainly do, and I think this begs a question about economic development and how do you go forward. I think you use the Wyoming Business Council and the Market Research Center in different ways. I think we spent a lot of time and money bringing larger businesses into Wyoming, and that's fine. But we need to spend more time on the local mom and pops in the Evanstons and the Worlands and the Thermopolises. This has been an uneven economic development in the last few years in Wyoming, and we need to find a way forward with people who have already committed to our state, who are already here, who've made the investment and want to stay. And I think there's an opportunity to diversify the economy.
And Mr. Wills, do you have
I'm glad Mr. Gosar brought up the Wyoming Business Council. It's the old Department of Commerce, 140 bureaucrats whose job is basically to give away money to those in the good old boy networks, big companies, corporations that don't need it, Microsoft, various others. I would do away with the funding for the Wyoming Business Council in my first budget.
I guess I'd like to ask both of you a question then. That's not on the list. What do you think then is government's role at all in economic development? And Mr. Gosar, I'd ask you that first. Do you think the government does have a role in economic development?
I think there is, but it has to be an open and accountable role, that it has to be available for people with benchmarks. If we're going to act like an investment bank, then we have to act like a transparent investment bank. But I focus on technicalities and opportunity and expertise. I think as a small business owner, I do my business well, but I don't do the marketing piece so well. I don't do the e-commerce piece so well. And I don't think I'm any different than most small businesses in Wyoming. And so here we have an opportunity for not a whole lot of money to offer those expertises to people in small communities and say, hey, can we go to Lander, and every time somebody puts Lander in Google, can we have them bring up all those businesses, those people who make hats and those people who make ropes and hotels and restaurants, so that they have an opportunity to see Wyoming for what it is. And we start promoting people as we can as a collective, instead of trying to figure out how to do that as a small business owner. And I think there's an opportunity with small business development in Wyoming.
And you started on this question, Mr. Wills. Do you have anything more to say?
Yeah, well, in answer to your last question, I think there's a fundamental difference between the progressive liberalism that can be called Keynesian, that believes that government is the driver of growth, that government is the decider of who should get funding, who should get capital, who should get loans, so on and so forth. And I fundamentally oppose government's role like that. The role of government is to create basic infrastructure and basic rule of law, and make sure that that basic infrastructure and basic rule of law is applied across the board to all parties on an equal basis. This Microsoft data center that's out here just frosts me, because 3 years ago the Wyoming Business Council, Wyoming Taxpayer Association, and the legislature got in cahoots and exempted all of the millions of dollars of computers that Microsoft put in that data center from having to pay a sales tax. I'm a small businessman. I buy a couple, 3 computers a year for my own little office down here in Cheyenne. I have to pay sales tax, 6% sales tax on those computers. Microsoft didn't have to pay a dime in sales tax on those computers. That's the good old boy network, the corporate corruption, the pig trough that I complain about, and I will make a big difference and make it not happen in this state.
Okay, Mr. Gosar, do you have a rebuttal?
Well, certainly. I think that Mr. Will's business would be not around if it weren't for government scientists and Department of Defense experts developing the Internet. There are some things that private business just cannot and will not do. Go to the moon, for instance, and let's think of all those different innovations that came because of that. And so, although I disagree with Mr. Wills entirely, I think there needs to be more transparency to the process.
Okay, and Mr. Wills, the next question.
I have one comment in rebuttal. You didn't build that. Sounds like the President of the United States. I think that's what I just heard. Okay, I'm sorry if I
Okay, then let's go.
interrupted.
Yeah. Civility is certainly important in this. What is to be gained or lost by Wyoming's working with federal agencies and other states on protection of sage-grouse habitat?
Actually, this is a place that probably Mr. Gosar and I agree. There has been an agreement that has been put in place in Sublette County and other counties in the West with private landowners that is essentially that if the landowners take certain steps to protect the sage grouse, that the sage grouse will not be used as a weapon against these landowners if the sage grouse is ever declared to be, an endangered species. And that's the first step that Pete Gosar has complained that the governor never goes to. In this case, actually, the governor did do it, but in general, the governor does like to sue people a lot. But the point is, yes, I accept that the environment or that the Endangered Species Act does have some cross-boundary, cross-state line controls or considerations, and so I accept that they have some level of jurisdiction for protection of species. But when the state and the federal government and the local landowners can all get together and stay out of court, that's a very good thing.
And thank you. Mr. Gosar?
Well, thank you, and I do agree with some of what Don had to say. Here's a model that works, and although Governor Meade didn't develop it, he did continue it, and I celebrate him for that. The core sage grouse area, I'm very familiar. I grew up in Pinedale, and I have hunted and walked in many of those places. Here's a collaborative effort that brought people to the table from differing interests and said, we have a problem. We do, and we can look at the graphs. The sage grouse is in decline, not just in our state, but around. How do we take control of that? How do we become the future and see what we want to see and get an opportunity to lead in this issue? And I think that this is a model of what should be done. Too often we don't get everybody together and say, here's what's happening. How do we fix it? And this is one of those times we did that. And it seems to be working. And I think that you're seeing it as models extended to Montana and Colorado and Utah. And I think that that's a real success story. And we should celebrate that. And we should maybe learn the lesson that sometimes you just get together and figure it out. That maybe is the most lasting solution to some of these problems.
Any rebuttal? You're both in agreement. Number 7, do you support the proposed constitutional amendment to allow appointment of non-residents to the University of Wyoming Board of Trustees? And Mr. Gosar, it's your turn to go first.
I do not. I believe that the Constitution is there for a reason, and it has to be compelling evidence to change the Constitution. I haven't heard a compelling reason yet. I think that there are plenty of good people in Wyoming that haven't had the opportunity to sit on that board. I think that a person from outside the state who has not graduated from the University of Wyoming, I wonder about that. And so I say until we exhaust all those folks in Wyoming that are able to sit on the board, this is a solution looking for a problem. But I think it does beg the larger question about the UW trustees. Currently, the governor is not in compliance, and he knows it. There's a stipulation that 7 members are to be of one political party. There are 9 or 8, depending on how you count it. Of those 12 members, 2 are women. There is a lack of diversity on that trustees board. There's a lack of people that have the opportunity that would be great that don't fit into that inner circle. And I think that as a governor, I would certainly look at different people. I would certainly look to balance out perspectives. I think when you have different perspectives, you get better solutions. And I think that's calling and lacking at the University Trustee Board right now.
Thank you. And then Mr. Wills?
Hear, hear. I agree 100%. I would like to take this opportunity, though, to talk about 2 other issues that are going to come up with regard to constitutional amendments. One is whether or not the Attorney General should be a constitutionally elected official in the state. That would require a constitutional amendment to change the Attorney General, which is now appointed by the governor, to being elected. Most states in the United States have an Attorney General who is elected, which provides some check and balance on the executive branch to have some level of independence from the governor. So I would support that constitutional amendment if it's proposed in 2015. And the second one is the elected superintendent of public instruction. SF 104 was an egregious travesty. It took away the votes of the people of the state of Wyoming. There is actually some discussion about making that be an appointed position, the Department of Education, the director of the Department of Education being appointed like what Rich Crandall was. I am opposed to that. So I am in favor of having votes for both the Attorney General and the Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Okay, Mr. Gosar, rebuttal?
I would like to say that I know mistakes are made, and they're made at the governor's office also. But I think the reaction to that notice by the Casper Star Tribune that they were non-compliance was instructive. Instead of saying, sorry, I'll make that right as soon as possible, words like impractical, we'll comply when we get around to it. You set a very low bar for law compliance. And you're the governor. You are the model citizen, supposedly, for the state. And if you don't comply with the law, how can you ask anybody else?
And you have a rebuttal then to that. Okay. The next question goes to Mr. Wills. The Wyoming Supreme Court has held that the public has no right to see materials the government relies upon to make decisions, the so-called deliberative process. The court based its decision on common law. Do you agree with this exemption from the Public Records Act? Would you support legislative action to make deliberative materials public?
Yes, I agree with the court, and no, I would not support a law to make deliberative materials public. Like I said, it isn't the deliberative materials that are the problem. It's the contracts. It's the money. I have a little article in my newspaper that has subtitle, Follow the Money. Okay? That's where all the graft is. That's where all the contractors are glomming around looking for contracts for their studies and so on and so forth. And so it isn't the deliberative materials that are going to be the source for reporters to be able to figure out what's really going on. It's the purchase orders, it's the contracts, and it's the payments, the checks and transfers that are made that I would make be on a website, every single one of them, no exceptions, not even salaries, 24 hours after any one of those three things is cut. And that's the kind of transparency we need. And this fight over deliberative materials, I think, is the wrong fight. It's not relevant.
And Mr. Gosar, would you like me to read the question again?
No, I'll handle this one. And I thought Mr. Wills and I were going to agree. And so I say no with the exemption. And yes, I would sponsor legislation or help support legislation, excuse me. This is important. You are a manager as a governor. And I think that you should always remember that. This is the people's government. This is their work that you're doing. And in no business that I've ever been involved in has a manager been able to say to the owner, no, you don't get a chance to see the books. Well, if you're making decisions where you can't show the books, well, maybe you ought not be making those decisions. In my administration, we'll voluntarily comply with any open request. I think it's important. This is the work of the people. And I think that this is something that is a big disagreement amongst us, Don and also Governor Meade, about how we view government. This is the people's business that you do, and it should be open and transparent. You get much better buy-in, and it leads to a less corrupt government if those are available to people. And I support removing the deliberative process from exemption.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Wills, do you have a rebuttal?
Yes. It's not the books that we're talking about here. These are the private emails during the deliberative process when person A may be saying to person B, you think we ought to fire this guy? Or should we give this contract to company A? No, we shouldn't give it to company A because they can't do X. This would open the door to lawyers and lawsuits, and it would be a disaster for deliberative process to actually take place in a reasonable manner within the bureaucracy of the state of Wyoming.
Obviously, you have a different approach, Mr. Gosar. What is your rebuttal?
Certainly, there are exemptions to the Open Records Act, and those things take care of some of those concerns by Mr. Wills. Once again, this is the people's work, and if you're going to write about how people should be fired, well, then that's your opinion, and you should have that for people to see. I don't have much. I've been in the government. I've been for 10 years. Any piece of work that I did with the government was subject to review, and I think it always should be. This is just a fundamental to our system of government, and I support it wholeheartedly.
Thank you. Now we're going to proceed to questions from the audience. I guess the first question, though, maybe comes from me. There's been a trend in the state legislature to attach substantive law to budget items, line item budget items. And what do you all think of that? Do you think that's an appropriate thing? Do you think that legislators should be permitted to really pass laws that are just footnotes to the budget? And Mr. Wills?
Actually, I defer to Amy Edmonds on this one. She was a representative for many years, or not many years, a few years, from Laramie County. And I had this long discussion with her because my first reaction was, no, it sounds wrong. It just sounds wrong, okay? And she said, no, that's really the way it works. The legislature has the authority during the budget session. This only happens during budget sessions, by the way. That during the budget session, they have the authority to do what is necessary to set policy. And so the fact that it is called a footnote, it doesn't really matter. It's the same as if it were the text that's written into the budget itself. How it gets in there is the ugliness of making sausage that politics happens in the legislature. But the reality is she convinced me that this was legitimate and legal and was a correct for the legislature to take this course of action.
Okay, Mr. Gosar, what do you think about the appropriateness of budget bills having footnotes?
Oh, I disagree once again respectfully with Mr. Wills. If you look at this last budget session, I'm intimately familiar with the next generation science standards that were taken care of with a budget footnote. Now, those science standards had been vetted by 30 plus of our best professional educators, K through 12 higher ed, over a year and a half through the state board process. And as they were nearing completion for public comment, here comes a budget footnote. Not discussed on either floor of either chamber, not having full public testimony, and this is what gives people craziness about their government, because here goes a policy that's important to kids, important to teachers, important to our education and our future, and it's done on the last day, on the 11th hour. It's inappropriate. John Patton, Republican from Sheridan, thinks that it should be not done. He's been there a long time. I agree with John Patton. If you're going to do policy matters, do it the way the founders intended. Have a full public vetting, and let's take public comment. And if you're going to do the censor of science in this case, then do it in the light of day, not on the 11th hour of the last day of the budget.
Thank you. Mr. Wills, rebuttal.
Yes, the next generation science standard were not turned down. They were postponed by the footnote. We can have the discussion on the policy. Obviously, my opponent likes that policy. I don't like that policy. What the question was about was whether it's legitimate and a correct way to set policy. And my answer was with regard to the legitimacy of the process, not the particular subject at hand.
Okay, and Mr. Gosar, your rebuttal.
Mr. Wills, my example was instructive on why I don't believe in the process. And so I think that, once again, it's amazing to me that people that ask for a more open government are just fine when these things are done. Policies are made with a handful of people in a smoke-filled room, as it were. I'm not fine with that. I think that's what turns people off from politicians and politics. And I think that for me, I won't be agreeable to that. If it's important enough to get done, then do it the right way.
Okay, now then, on to some of these intriguing questions. Mr. Gosar, the first question goes to you. Would you support funding infrastructure maintenance like highway construction? How would you support funding that? Would you support diverting funds from the non-statutory portion of the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund?
I think this is a conversation that has to be had, and yes, I would. And I think that there's an opportunity to talk about the gas tax in this. The gas tax was sold for people from out state to pay for the roads and bridges. Well, if that's the case, let's use it during tourist season. But outside that season, it's a regressive tax to the people of Wyoming. We're stashing hundreds of millions of dollars away every year. Certainly, a good use of that is infrastructure. I think of the state is run like a business. I think that's important. And any good business reinvests in its people and its infrastructure. And this is a good use of dollars. We have coffee cans everywhere, that coffee can analogy. And we're not even sure what happens. One of the first things that I'll do is have an audit of those coffee cans. Some of those coffee cans are in existence for a problem that no longer exists. And maybe we could use that for infrastructure, roads and bridges and highways. I've traveled a lot in this state this last few months, and there are places where we could use that money for infrastructure.
And then, Mr. Wills, your response.
Read the question again.
How would you support funding infrastructure maintenance of highways, especially construction and maintenance? Would you support diverting funds from the non-statutory portion of the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund?
There's two questions in there that are kind of buried with each other, and one is the maintenance and the other is construction. One of the bogeymen that YDOT brought up when it was justifying its 10-cent fuel tax increase was that, we won't be able to maintain our highways if we don't get this extra money. That was a smokescreen, because the reality is maintenance is number one priority. They have lots of projects that aren't maintenance. The new visitor center south of Cheyenne, the strange overpass that we now have south of Cheyenne. I don't get it at all. These are really expensive projects to do, and they're for the benefit of the Contractors Association. They aren't for our benefit. The first thing that YDOT should have as its top priorities maintenance of the existing highways. They have plenty of money to do that. So the question is, do we want to divert some of our savings, the non-statutory money, into infrastructure projects? And the answer to that is, yes, I actually would agree with that in certain situations. And I would absolutely not agree to any increase in the fuel tax. And as a matter of fact, I would like to roll back that 10-cent fuel tax increase. I do, however, agree with Mr. Gosar that a big audit needs to be made of the hundreds of coffee cans, as Mr. Meade calls them, that have funds, $18 billion worth of funds of the state of Wyoming's money.
A rebuttal, Mr. Gosar?
Well, I think it's important that we have good roads and bridges and infrastructure. That's what companies look for when they're considering moving to a state. And I think that to not have that, because you want to put money in accounts, I'm a believer in savings. I'm a person from the middle class. I understand the role of savings. But you also have to invest in your people and your places. And this is one opportunity that we have, and we need to take that opportunity.
And rebuttal, Mr. Wills? The next question then goes to Mr. Wills. The Wyoming Constitution requires that the cost of education should be nearly as free as possible. Tuition at UW is pushing almost $19,000 a year. What is your view on the cost of education, and what can you do as governor to change that situation?
Well, there's two problems with the $19,000 figure. The University of Wyoming has essentially zero oversight, so they're spending money at a really rapid rate. K-12, same thing. They're spending money at a really rapid rate. Depending upon how you look at it, $15,000 to $19,000 a year, probably the third or fourth most expensive education system in the United States per person. The state government is spending. It's the number one driver of expenses in the state of Wyoming. It's really expensive here. That said, I completely agree with the Constitution, and I think that for Wyoming residents, that the University of Wyoming should be as free as possible, should be more free than it is now. And then you get into this question of, well, what is a Wyoming resident? And I know in other universities that if you go to a school in Florida and the first year you pay the out-of-state tuition, well, you immediately say, well, I moved here, so sophomore, junior, and senior year, you get the in-state numbers. We aren't going to do that if I had my way, if I were king, okay? We would basically make sure that you were somebody who attended 25, 50, or 75, or 100% of your high school year's credits in Wyoming if you were to get this free education, and I would increase the price for out-of-state students.
And Mr. Gosar, do you want that question repeated?
Would you please?
The Wyoming Constitution requires that the cost of higher education to be as nearly free as possible. Tuition at UW is pushing almost $19,000 a year. What is your view on the cost of education, and what can you do as governor to address this situation?
Well, I think you can highlight it, and I think that that's important. As a kid who went to the University of Wyoming of modest means, I think that it's important that it be available to people, and it serves our society and our Wyoming citizens well to have an educated workforce and educated people. You can't leave a person after 4 years with a crushing debt. That changes things for people. That limits options. Also makes them to leave our state. And I think that for us, the founders thought that this was important, that education was an opportunity piece. For me, that's also the case. We need to make that university as free as possible. I agree. And there are ways to do that. I think that there are hidden fees that a student is not able to reject should they want to. I think that's not how we do Wyoming. That's not the independence that we realize in Wyoming. And so, yes, we need to find a way to move the cost of tuition lower. It's important for us, it's important for the kids, and it's important for our future.
Mr. Wills, do you have further comment or rebuttal? And Mr. Gosar, you want to rebut what Mr. Wills said?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Then this question, Mr. Gosar, goes to you, and it really goes along with your comment. How will you strengthen Wyoming so that young people have more opportunities?
Well, you have to diversify your energy portfolio, and you have to diversify your economic development. And then those are the keys that we've been talking about since I was a little kid in western Wyoming, the same ideas. But we've been taking the same approach year after year after year. How do you do something differently? So I think back to a few months ago when the Tesla battery factory was looking for a home. We have the largest lithium deposit. We have soda ash that's used in lithium battery production, and we didn't even take a shot at it. We didn't take a shot at a $5 billion gigafactory. We're certain that there's more money to that. There's certain spin-offs that would be available, and here we were working or having the ability to work on storage. You talk to anybody, and I've talked to many people in the power plant industry who say, storage is the key. That's the future. We should be hustling towards storage. Those are young jobs. Those are technical jobs. Those are skilled jobs. Healthcare expansion, 250 healthcare jobs for Medicaid expansion or more. Those are young jobs. Those are skilled jobs. Those are high-paying jobs. We can't turn down those things. We cannot continue to do the things that we've always done and expect a different result. We have to actually make it a priority to keep kids from going across the border. We can't maintain the brain drain for much longer.
Thank you. And Mr. Wills?
I absolutely agree that you can't keep doing the same thing. Like Einstein said, that's the definition of insanity, if you expect a different result but you keep doing the same thing over and over again. But the reality is you have two choices for how you diversify the economy. You can either have a government-driven, top-down approach, subsidy-laden, let's give money to Microsoft, Tesla, Magpul, whoever, and hope that they show up here and throw a few jobs off. Or we could make Wyoming be the best place in the country to do business. If we could get rid of the sales tax, and we could, it would be hard, we'd have to cut back pretty heavy in certain areas. But we could do it with the amount of savings we have. We could make this state, just like New Hampshire, be a no sales tax, no income tax state. If you look at New Hampshire, it is a jewel, a economic miracle in a sea of socialist, Marxist progressivism in New England. Okay? And the reality is, I would propose that in the first budget that I propose would be a 1 cent knockoff of the sales tax down to 3 cents, and hopefully we could get it to 2 and to 1 and to 0. And if that were to happen, you'd have to fight off the Teslas of our world to not come here.
Okay, Mr. Gosar, do you have any comments on?
I do, and I imagine that Mr. Wills is not going to Massachusetts anytime soon. But I think here's an opportunity to look at things differently. We've been rated one of the most business-friendly states for as long as I can remember. But here we are again with an undiversified economy. No, Mr. Wills, that's not the solution. It really isn't. The solution is finding jobs and technologies and the jobs of the future. I talked with a lady who works as a computer programmer from Sheridan. She does not do her work in Sheridan, but she lives there. Those are jobs, she says, they're available to anybody. We need to work on that.
Thank you. And Mr. Wills, do you have any additional comments?
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand what is different that Pete is proposing than what we've done in the past. I propose a significant change to what we're doing, and the subsidy model that we've been using for years because we got all this extra money and we're trying to entice people to show up here and give us jobs, it just doesn't work.
Mr. Gosar? Oh, you already did.
I did.
Rebut.
Although I'd love to.
So you both will have a challenge in dealing with the state legislature. It's a Republican-dominated legislature, so your party would not be in control, and Mr. Wills, you're an independent. How would you propose to deal with the Wyoming legislature? And we'll have Mr. Wills do that first.
Thank you. Good question. That was asked earlier at one of the prior forums. And what's interesting about the Wyoming House is the Good Old Boy Network runs the Wyoming House and pretty much owns the Wyoming Senate. There's about 10 or 12 people who are loyal to the Good Old Boy Network, who are the leaders who basically work with the Wyoming Taxpayer Association, the Business Council, make sure that everybody's wheel gets greased. There's about 10 or 12 really good, solid, frugal, limited government people also in the House. Those are the people who I will get along with very well. I'm not going to give out names here, but there is that group. And then there's about the 35 or so in the middle who just follow with whatever way the wind's blowing. It's unfortunate. That's what most politicians are. And the reality is if the frugal, limited government groups were empowered by a governor who's sitting in there who says, I'm going to veto all your big spending, or I'm going to veto this little Good Old Boy Network program, all of a sudden they're going to have a whole lot more power. And I will be able to negotiate with leadership and with the Good Old Boy Network and with the Senate, because I will be willing to use the power of the veto to make a difference in this state. Now, I'm not saying I can accomplish everything, but I think I would have a pretty good shot to make a difference as governor of the state of Wyoming.
And Mr. Gosar, how do you deal with the legislature?
Well, I think I look at it fundamentally different. You have to have respect for people in those positions, and I certainly do. I think mutual respect also leads to a mutual understanding, and from there you work on solutions. For me, it's about solutions, and I have no business not telling the legislature we need to work on solutions. If you would like to work on things that are not moving the state forward, if you don't want to address health care, you don't want to address education policy, or those things that make us the best in America, well, we're going to have some problems. But you don't start out with that. You say, hey, how can we get early childhood education passed? I'm a supporter, I'm a believer. How do I make that happen for you? How do we get this done? What makes sense? Do you have a fiduciary responsibility? I understand that, so do I. What are your ideas? And then you sit down and you negotiate and you compromise. Too long. Politics has been about winning instead of compromise and solutions. And I think it starts with a healthy respect for people and a willingness to work, and then you have to listen. And you have to truly listen and realize that you're not the expert in the room all the time, that you're one of those people who looks and wants to find solutions. Policies matter. Politicians, not so much.
And Mr. Wills, do you have a rebuttal to that?
No, other than that last comment. The politicians matter a whole lot because they got the power. That's the unfortunate reality. That's really the reason I got into politics. I recognize that from the outside, sending letters to the editor, asking the governor, asking your rep to do the right thing or whatever, it isn't the way things change. The only way things change is if you get some power. And so that's why I got into this race, so I could get some power to make some difference.
And Mr. Gosar, any rebuttal?
It's not about power for me, and I don't know that you would want somebody in that office who is about power. I think it's about solutions. It's about people. It's about meeting them where they are and finding a way to help them along that path. Wyoming's got great people, and we have an opportunity to tap that vast resource, but you're not going to do it by continually bashing them. You're not going to do it by continually beating them about the head and saying, I know what I'm talking about all the time. You have to work with people. I grew up in one of the reddest parts of Wyoming. That doesn't much matter. You work with people, we're Wyoming people. We're all about moving this state forward.
I have been advised that the question that I asked you about UW tuition wasn't completely correct. The cost to attend UW, room, board, books, and so on, is about $18,000, and the tuition is $4,646 a year. It's still a big amount of money.
I didn't want to jump in and question that, but yes, I'm glad you clarified that.
Now, before I ask another question, I think it might be fun to sort of have a change of pace. And I'd like to let you, Mr. Gosar, and Mr. Wills ask each other a question.
Oh, dear.
Oh. Which would you like to go first?
Oh, you may go first, Mr. Gosar. Or you may defer to Mr. Wills, depending on...
Oh, I won the toss. I'll go first.
Okay.
Ms. Guthrie, if that's all right. Mr. Wills, I hear constant battering of the federal government from you. Is there a thing, a policy, a program that the federal government does well, and why?
Actually, the federal funding of the interstate highway. The Constitution speaks of this thing in addition to the post office. The words post roads are used as one of the enumerated powers of the federal government. And a federal gasoline and diesel tax that funds post roads, today known as interstate highways and U.S. highways, actually they do pretty well. And other than the fact that they're diverting some of that money to non-highway stuff, but not too bad, that part of the the federal-state relationship, I think, is perfectly legitimate and actually works pretty well. Come on,
Okay.
you could do better than that, Pete.
Then you have a question as well.
I do. Gun control. There were two bills introduced in the 2014 legislature, both of which died for lack of time. And yeah, it was a budget session. I get it. That dealt with guns in schools. The good gun bill would have allowed citizens who have concealed carry permits to carry concealed only on all school grounds across the state of Wyoming. University of Wyoming Community Colleges, K-12. The fake gun rights bill was the bill that was supported by Meade and was actually offered by my state rep, Representative Eklund. Basically said, the teachers and the administrators, you can have guns, but you have to go get training, and the school boards, all 48 of them across the state, get to veto whether or not you get to have guns. Well, you and I know that probably 40 of the 48 school boards would have said, no, you couldn't have them. So it was a fake guns in schools bill. So my question to Mr. Gosar is, which of those two bills would you support, or is there another approach you would take to protecting our students from crazed gunmen?
Wow, is that a question?
That's a lot more fun than many of my questions.
That is a fun one. I am a hunter, born and raised in Wyoming, and I think our laws, as it applies to guns, are adequate. I've never had a problem purchasing a gun, never had a problem using a gun. I think they're adequate. For me, this is about subjecting people to something that we won't subject ourselves to. I think in both of those pieces of legislation, we carved out the legislature and we carved out the governor's office. Well, if it's good at schools, then it's good at the legislature and the governor's office, and I would like to see those applied uniformly. If it's not good for the legislature and it's not good for the governor's office, well, then it's not good for schools as far as I'm concerned. I'm a big believer, if it applies to one, it applies to all. And I always think it's curious when we get into these matters that we carve out our own special interests, and I don't believe in that. So, we have adequate gun laws in Wyoming. They're fine. I've never had a problem, and I've been a hunter for a long, long time.
Well, this evening has certainly gone by very quickly, and I still have several questions that I won't be able to ask you. So I now would like to turn to the last part of this debate, and we will have closing statements, and they will be 2 minutes long. And Mr. Gosar, your turn to do your closing statement, and then we'll be followed by Mr. Wills.
Well, thank you all, and I would like to thank you, Mary, for moderating and for all the great questions. It's been important. And I'd like to thank Don Wills, too. Without him, I would have done 6 of these by myself. And it's nice to have somebody along the way. But I think it's also instructive that it's just Don and I. When you run for governor, you're running to the health and welfare and the safety of the people of Wyoming. And if you don't grant them access, if you don't have an honest take for them, you disrespect them, and you just disrespect the process. And for me, it's never been about that. I have not poll tested an answer. I've not poll tested a piece of my platform. It's who I am. I think it's respectful of Wyoming people. I'm born and raised here, and I have great concern, and I have great understanding, and I love the people of Wyoming. They're a vast, untapped resource that I wish somebody would listen to. I wish somebody would have said during the SF-104 days, what do people out in Worland think? What do people in Laramie think? What do people in Jackson think? I think we would have had better legislation. And I think we would have had better solutions. And for me, if you're going to talk it, you walk it. And so I have been the most open candidate that Wyoming has seen run for governor. Every Wednesday night I've taken 2 hours of questions, live and uncensored, unfiltered. And it's me on the other end. And people cringe when you tell them you're going to do that as a candidate. They say, well, that's going to show up in an ad. Well, it hasn't yet. And I've learned so much from that. And then you go to people's doors, and you go to the community events, and you do these things with Don Wills, because it's important. You're running for the people's office, and you have to go out and talk to people. And to do so, you do a disservice, and you lose the opportunity to tap into that vast resource of Wyoming talent. And I won't do that when I'm governor. I'll open it up, and I'll do what I did in my campaign in the governor's office. There's so much more we can do in Wyoming, and I'm looking forward to doing it. Please vote for me, November 4th, Pete Gosar for governor. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Wills?
I appreciate everything your organization did tonight. I actually believe this was the best of the forums that I've participated in, but then we didn't have four of us, so we had more time for each of us to actually make our points, so I thank you very much. A couple of the issues that we didn't get to that I'd like to just touch on. One is the Refugee Resettlement Center that I talked about in one of the earlier things. Governor Meade, on his own volition, created a Refugee Resettlement Center, wrote a letter to the federal government, said, we want to do a public-private partnership. Some Somalis have come to the state of Wyoming and are being housed someplace. We know nothing of this. There have been lots of questions asked of the governor about this issue, and quite frankly, very little has been forthcoming from the governor. So I really would like him to address that issue. I suspect he won't. A second issue, I've not brought this up before. I really would like to put this in front of people. And that's the issue of the ballot laws in the state of Wyoming. I have on page 5 of my newsletter a fairly lengthy article. By the way, I wrote every word of my 8 pages. That was my tome, whatever the word is. The article is about campaign finance laws and election laws. And it's apparent in this state that the election laws of this state are severely broken. I had to file a lawsuit with Jennifer Young of the Constitution Party to even be allowed to accept funds prior to the major party primary. We fortunately got a fairly quick decision on that. The election situation we have with the primary, with the short season, really should just be called the incumbent re-election laws. They need severe change. I'm Don Wills, independent candidate for governor, www.electdonwills.org, and thank you very much for your time tonight.
Let's thank them. And as I earlier said, thank you for having the courage and the energy to run for office. We all appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you, Peter.